Hi, guys. Welcome to yet another edition of Radio 815, episode number 9. I'm your host, per usual. My name is Marcelo Nostroza, joined as always by my co host, Matt Crandall. And on this week's episode, we sort of start out a new era of Radio 815 too. If you've been listening since the beginning, we've been talking about Felicity, but as you know, if you've been listening to us, Felicity came to an end in last week's episode. And this week, we get to move on to J.J. Abrams' second TV show that he created in the early 2000s, I believe. And that TV show is simply called Alias. Now, if you're not familiar with Alias, before we start off here, I'm just going to give you a brief, sort of a small summary as to what Alias is about. Well, Alias stars Jennifer Garner and Bradley Cooper, and Jennifer Garner is a grad student studying for her degree in something I can't remember what it is, but in her off time, she works for this little insurance company who is actually supposedly a super secret dark section of what she thinks is the CIA. And that's all I'll say about that. And eventually shenanigans ensue to where she finds out that she's not working for who actually she thinks she's working for. So there's the broad conceit of the series. With all that being said and out of the way and all that crappy introduction that I just put out there, Matt, what did you think about the pilot of Alias?
So I absolutely love the pilot of Alias. Truth be told, written and directed by the man, J.J. Abrams. And as you mentioned, it premiered September 30th, 2001, and it's an extended episode. It's about 69 minutes, and they actually aired it commercial-free with only a block of commercials at the beginning and at the end so that people could really get sucked into the story, which is something they only do, every once in a blue moon. You sometimes see them do that with a show. And it works wonders, I think, when you were watching it at the time. And this, like I said, September 30th, 2001. So this show literally premiered like 3 weeks after 9/11. So very weird time for a show to be premiering. Also, this was just a couple of weeks before Felicity would start their final season. Which, JJ wrote that premiere episode. So the guy was busy at this point in time. But when you watch this episode, it's got everything. Like, it feels like a movie. And I think at the time, and I remember I watched, unfortunately, because of everything that was going on, I watched the pilot of Alias and I absolutely loved it. And then I only saw like a few episodes here and there because this was pre-DVR. So like I was at school and I didn't have a PVR or a DVR to record. I remember I had VHS tapes that I have still kicking around that say like Alias and got a few of the episodes on it. So for me, I fell in love with it, but it wasn't until this was also one of the shows near the beginning of TV on DVD. So, 24 and Alias were like two of the real proponents of TV on DVD because this premiered in 2001 and 2 years later, season 1 and season 2 both hit DVD like a month apart. And that's where like a lot of people were able to just binge watch, TV on DVD was the original bingeable, and Alias, especially from the pilot, just lets you know, this is going to be the ultimate serialized movie quality bingeable show with so many twists and turns that as I was rewatching this pilot, because I haven't watched Alias in a few years, I'm starting to watch it and I'm like, oh yeah, Sydney works for SD6 and she doesn't know what SD6 actually is. Like, she's at Credit Dauphin, she thinks she's part of the good guys. And I'm like, how many episodes is it until she finds out? And then like later in the episode, I'm like, oh yeah, she finds out in this one. And then I'm like, oh, she's going to be a double agent. How many episodes till that happens? Oh, it happens in this one. And then I'm like, oh, and then there's a mole. Is she going to find out who it is? Or is that like 5 episodes in? And it's like, nope, that happens in this one. So much stuff happens over the 69 minutes. And it feels like, this is before JJ did Mission Impossible, but it felt like a Mission Impossible type of show meets a Felicity because you've got Sydney Bristow, this strong woman who her cover is that she's a grad student. So it's mixing those two worlds, and it's just so good.
The thing that I actually love about this pilot is that right off the beginning of the pilot, it starts off with Sydney Bristow being, tortured in a deep part of China by this weird, creepy Chinese gentleman in a suit. And I will not kid you. All I heard was, where is it? Where is it? That's not what isn't that what you asked for? I don't know what you want, but just tell me what you want and I'll get it for you. Where is the rabbit's foot? That's all I heard. I was like, because this, this scene to kick off the episode is very, very reminiscent of Mr. Tom Cruise being tied up in a chair and tortured by Philip Seymour Hoffman. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I loved about this episode that JJ also did with Felicity, but in this episode, he even played more with it. This episode is told in various pieces. Mm-hmm. It's not told straight.
Yeah, we jump around in time quite a bit.
So I do like that aspect of the show. And one thing that I thought was very, very funny, but it was also very, very sad because we all know what happens to him eventually, which is something that I'm going to talk about here in a second. But when Sydney's boyfriend proposes to her right out there in front of, in front of gaggles of students and some professors, and as he's he basically sings to her in the middle of the campus, and in the middle of his proposal, the bells go off. I'm like, that's like the funniest thing ever, or the funniest blooper that they didn't plan for. Right. When he's, when he says, "Shut up," that entire sequence of him professing his love for Sydney on his knees is just great. And then when he calls Sydney's father up, played by Victor Garver, and he asks for his permission to marry Sydney, and the way that Victor Garver just annihilates this poor
takes
guy,
him down.
It's like what? It's like what? How can you do that? I'm like, you don't even know this guy. But that first scene really does a great job of illustrating how the character played by Victor Garver is throughout a majority of the series. Also, I love the fact that when Sydney tells her friend Will about her proposal when they meet to go running on the track, the second that she tells Will about Danny proposed to me, I'm going to get married, the way that Bradley Cooper plays it, the way the way that he sort of moves his face and sides his face indicates that there's some history there, but we don't eventually find out what that history is until
Will is the Noel of Alias.
I would give that to you just a little bit, but I kind of wouldn't because Will didn't stick around for so long. I mean, he does eventually depart, which is unfortunate. But I did love the way that Bradley Cooper played that moment and the way that Sydney just reacted in that moment. But the moment of the episode, the moment of the episode for me, the one that had the most impact, is when Sydney comes home after her mission that she just did for Sloan, dickhead. I'm going to call him a dickhead a lot during these because I hate that guy. After Sydney comes home after doing a mission, she finds the body of Danny dead in in their bathtub, and the way that Jennifer Gardner comes into the bathroom, and she almost like loses her breath, right? She walks up to the tub.
She does like a silent scream at first, which is great.
The way that she held it, and it was like, I was like, you're going to let it go? And I'm like, oh my gosh, she's going to let it go. Holy crap. And when she let it go, JJ held on it for a couple seconds, but when she let it go, it was just awful. Mm-hmm. And then when she rushes to SD6 and when she threatens Sloan, he grabs him by the collar, pushes him back. I was like, I really hope that you would just shoot him right now. But if you shoot him right now, that would be the end of the show. I really liked the way that the way that Jennifer Gardner handled grief and played with that. Also, I did appreciate Marshall and how scatterbrained he was. I'm like, dude, you think you work for the CIA and you can't even string two sentences together without stumbling. What's wrong with you? But in all fairness, I do understand that that's a character trait and that's what makes him endearing to us.
I love Marshall. Kevin Weisman is so good, and he's so different than he was on Felicity as Earl or whoever it was. I talked about it back then because he's clumsy and awkward and he's like stuttering, and there's definitely shades of Simon Pegg's Benji, built into Marshall that JJ kind of took that and ran with it later in Mission Impossible when he introduced that character.
But to go off one of your points, one thing that I really enjoyed about this episode, I really, really enjoyed, is the fact that this episode has Mission Impossible vibes all over it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know anything about me, you know that I love mission. And to see the team, for lack of a better word, get their mission from Sloan, and then to see to see them, subsequently go on the mission and find this weird device thing that I totally forgot about, and I was like, oh my god, there's that thing, and I can't remember what it does, but it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It was just a lot of fun. I mean, Jennifer Gardner, I thought, was an inspired choice to play Sydney Bristow. And the fact that this episode, I mentioned it already, but the fact that this episode isn't told from point A to point B is also a plus. The fact that it's told in pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So as the audience member, when you first watch it, you don't know exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
So I did appreciate that. Also, I did find the one part where the Chinese gentleman who's torturing Sydney Bristow, when he's about to pull her teeth out, and she goes, I just have one thing. You should start with the teeth in the back first.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, dude, I was like, this is horrifying and terrible. And and the fact that, again, JJ lingered on that shot and you hear her scream and squirm in her own chair, I thought was very effective. There is one thing about this pilot episode that I did not like at all. I understood why he did it, mm-hmm. and I understood the device of him doing it, but I wasn't pleased that after Sydney told Danny that she worked for the CIA, that he, during a bender, decided to call her answering machine, and sort of. I understand. Just give me a second.
I was gonna say it's a J.J. Abrams calling card, leaving a bad message on an answering machine, as we found out during Felicity.
Yeah. I mean, I understand why he did it, but I'm like, didn't Sydney mention to Danny in the shower scene, which is a really nice scene, that if you tell anyone, like don't say this shit on an open phone line, but then I kind of remembered that she didn't have any chance to tell him not what to do. I mean, he sort of just heard the information and then he walked out. But then I said, didn't she have another opportunity to not tell him what not to do when they had that meeting next to the oil machines on the hill, you know? And I was like, yeah, I understand why JJ did what he did to really give the character of
it's got to give her the drive to be the double agent. You know what? It's one of those things where they tried to make it seem like the character didn't realize how serious it was when he was told. Like, he gets it, but he doesn't get it, which is part of why he leaves that message. And the other reason that I think they did it is because we're supposed to not think that, him leaking this information is going to cause him to be murdered, because usually the CIA might just disappear someone or relocate them. Right. But it shows us how bad SD6 actually is. That something as minor as, a message on an answering machine can get you murdered. But it definitely feels, it's the least earned moment of the episode, because a lot of the other stuff feels realistic and it feels plausible, but that's the one thing that even I'm watching it, I was like, okay, like this guy's a moron. The only thing, my main problem with Danny is that because we only spend a little bit of time with him before he gets murdered, and then his murder has to drive a lot of Sydney through horrible situations as the season goes on. And as her relationship with Michael Vartan's Vaughn, and her relationship with Will go on, what we see of Danny in this episode is not charismatic enough for me to actually care. I know that it sounds corny, but if they had done some sort of stunt casting, because it was only going to be one episode, if they had gotten like a face, like, somebody that you saw it and you're like, ooh, I know that actor and I love everything he's done, and then they killed him half an hour into the episode, it would be like, holy crap. And then it would be more powerful. Like every time that she's sad about Danny, we would actually be sad about Danny. As season 1 goes on, every time she's sad about Danny, I'm like, that moron? Like, why? Like, get over it. He was an idiot. He deserved to die. Right? So that's my one thing with this episode, which, you kind of mentioned that you don't like what he does, and I don't like what he does either, because it feels fake. But I also feel like if they had, and I don't know who would have been like the name in 2001 that would have been age appropriate, but if you're watching like something now, and let's say, if they made Alias today, Ryan Gosling shows up as the fiance, and then he gets murdered half an hour into it. 10 episodes later, when the girl is, starting to fall for the other guy, we would still remember Ryan Gosling had been in it. So, or like Chris Evans, like there's something, like one of those things would drive us and make it more interesting than faceless guy who happened to be on like an episode of ER or whatever it was. That's my only small nitpick. But the main thing I think that makes this show so awesome is the perfect casting, because Jennifer Garner is so good because she's beautiful. She can play the cute, funny stuff, but she also kicks so much ass. And like you said, that line where she's like, start with the back, and you're like, oh crap, Sydney Bristow is tough. And the hair, and how that whole thing comes about is just so awesome. Yeah. And as the season goes on, watching her do dress up is part of the fun of the show. But then they do something smart where, SD6 could be, once we find out that SD6 is bad guys, right? Arvin Sloan, played by Ron Rifkin, like it feels like a bad guy from the beginning. When he's trying to be like the father figure to Sydney because her own father is so distant, we still feel like there's something wrong with him. But Carl Lumley as Dixon, like you just love that guy from moment one. Like he's so likable, and him and Sydney have a great rapport. So like you feel like there's no way this guy could know they're evil, because Dixon is such a good guy. So that makes that shock of like SD6 is bad hit so much harder. It's like, holy crap. And even like I end up loving Victor Garber as this show goes on, but he's a jackass in this episode. You're like, oh man, Sydney's father sucks. Just like, Felicity's dad sucks. Like in this episode, you're like, this guy sucks. But then when he shows up at the end and reveals that he is the other double agent, it was like my jaw hit the floor the first time. It was like, holy crap, like this show is crazy, and it's only episode 1.
When I saw Alias the first time, I had no idea who Victor Garber was. I've never seen him in anything else, but a couple,
he was in Titanic.
Yeah, no.
I was gonna say, he's not recognizable for that, but he's a Canadian treasure. So I was like, oh, that guy, he's popular up in Canada. He's one of our homegrown talents.
Okay. I didn't know that. I know that. Look at you dropping knowledge.
Yeah.
But when I first saw Alias, I hadn't seen Titanic yet, but the the first time I saw Titanic in the movie theater, my grandfather will tell you, I'm like, holy shit, that's Sydney's
Yeah.
father. I was like, holy shit, he looks younger. What the hell? He's on a boat. It's gonna sink. But I've always been a Victor Garber fan since Alias. I think you're right. I mean, he is a little dick. I mean, there's no doubt about that. He's a little dick in the pilot, but I feel that as the seasons go along, he does become a softer character. I mean,
he does. It's like a redemption story for him, his whole arc.
Yeah, I mean, he still does keep those hard edges, but as the seasons go along, he does become more endearing as a character, and I did appreciate that aspect of this first pilot episode.
And I do want to mention that, Bradley Cooper was nobody when this started, and I liked him on the show, and so whenever he would pop up in other things, I was always like rooting for him because I'm like, it's Will from Alias. And so watching it now, when Bradley Cooper is obviously a superstar, and you're like, oh my God, look at him. He's so young and he's got this horrible hair. Like, what is going on? So that's fun for people who haven't seen this in a long time, just to see, Jackson Maine looking like this wimp with bleach blonde hair and, trying to be a reporter. So that's fun. And I do like, Francie is good. I like that it feels like a more diverse cast, and just so many decent peripheral characters they start setting on the board, and we only meet Vaughn in the last, little bit. Anne Weiss, good old Greg Grunberg shows up, even though he was still on Felicity. He did a couple episodes in this season. So having him be there as JJ's, Rabbit's Foot. As much as I absolutely love Michael Giacchino's music now, I wasn't a huge fan of the score of Alias. And I think part of it is it's very electronic and like trying to be hip for the time. And probably at the time it was fine, but I didn't love some of the music cues. I think it gets better as the series goes on. And certainly as, his career has just gone through the roof. And I think Lost was a big turning point for his music. But the music in Alias was just okay for me. I didn't love it as much, but I do love the cool special effects, the weirdness of the red ball that we see, sort of sprinkling in like, hey guys, this show's going to be a little bit weird and there's going to go some places. And one of the guys who does like a polygraph test at the CIA or SD6 or whatever was the tall man from Phantasm, Angus Scrimm, and I'm a big horror fan. So when he showed up in this, and he's in a couple episodes, that was awesome. And I know that JJ was a big Phantasm fan growing up because Bad Robot restored that movie a few years ago and helped clean it up and make it look nice.
It's something interesting about Alias, because Alias to me is sort of a touchstone of JJ's career, not because this was like the first show that introduced him to the mass public, but this was the first show where he started to work with some people that he would work with for many years to come. And one of them is my favorite composer working today, Michael Giacchino. You mentioned that the score was a little techno and a little techno-y. It doesn't bother me as much because I will be honest with you. The only reason why I started watching Alias was because of a girl who I had feelings for when I was in school, and for those of you who care, it wasn't the girl I talked about last week. So yeah, that's the only reason why I started watching Alias. And when I started watching Alias initially, I hadn't become the guy that I am today. So when I first started watching the show, I was like, I don't care about this JJ guy. I don't care about who does the music. I don't care about any of these people who actually make the show. So watching it now, it's like I have a new appreciation for it because I do care about all these people who make the meal that we all see as a television show.
Yeah.
And I do think that it is wonderful that this is sort of the touchstone where we, for the lack of a better word, we don't see him, but we get introduced to his music. We get introduced to Michael's music. We also meet later on in the show. We also meet, or we get introduced to the writing of two of my favorite writers of all time. They're gonna start working on the show pretty soon. So yay!
Yeah, episode 3.
Oh yeah. Oh, thank you. See, you're the facts guy. See, that's why we're gonna net you the facts guy of the show. So when their episode comes up, episode 3, you guys know that I'm gonna be happy, or you're gonna know that I'm gonna be happy, Matt, because I love them so much as writers. And also this is sort of the introduction of my favorite production company in Hollywood today, who does a lot of stuff, but needs to do more JJ stuff, more JJ-ish stuff, Bad Robot, because this is sort of the launch of Bad Robot.
It is, and man, the Bad Robot is different at the end, because like it's the old logo, and it's the old, shouting, and so like, at first I was like, whoa, oh yeah, I forgot. It wasn't always what I'm used to.
And I got interested in production companies and directors and writers. I actually researched who the hell those kids were.
Yeah.
Because I did find that really annoying. But after finding out who they were, I was like, okay, yeah, of course he would do that. But I really love Bad Robot as a company. They have done some really, really awesome shit. And Alias is up there in their meter of awesomeness.
Go ahead.
I'm just really looking forward to watching this, to sort of rewatching the show again. Because I haven't seen it in about 4 or 6 years. Like, I love JJ, but Alias is not as special to me as some of his other projects are. Most notably Felicity, and most notably Lost. I mean,
right.
When we get to Lost, I'm gonna go crazy, people. I'm gonna try to judge it fairly, but I'm gonna go a little nuts.
Right, and it's one of those things where I haven't seen this. I haven't watched Alias since Alias went off the air, but like it's in my if I'm listing J.J. Abrams things I love, it's like top 5. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those things where I haven't visited it in a long time, but rewatching this pilot, it just reminded me, like, now we have so many shows that are the scope of a movie and that are super serialized, but like in 2001 we didn't. Like, this and 24 premiering in the same month changed television forever. Like, there were a lot of crime of the week shows, and they weren't all, every episode ends on a cliffhanger and every episode feels like a movie. But 24 and Alias changed the game. Like, we would not have half of the shows we have now if 24 and Alias hadn't become such big hits. They hadn't set the tone for TV on DVD, bingeable. You have to own the shows after you watch it so you can revisit all the little stuff. Those were like the two landmark shows that happened to come out at the same time and both be lightning in a bottle that literally changed the face of television. So, as much as I love 24, J.J. Abrams and Alias is the one that really is the heart and the mythology that is so present in all of the cool shows we geek out over nowadays.
Mm-hmm. So, in your mind, Alias is one of the shows that changed television. You wouldn't say that, for the lack of a better word, I know this is a Sophie's Choice thing, considering that we made a podcast about this guy, but you wouldn't say that Lost is that show that sort of changed the way that television is done?
I don't think there would be Lost if there wasn't this. Now, in terms of broadening the mythology, and Lost is of a different era where it was more about the online community and everybody poring over frame by frame. So I definitely feel that, and certainly in terms of movie quality, Lost elevated the game, but also was the most expensive pilot of all time at that time, right? Mm-hmm. So I definitely think both are really important in the history of TV, but I don't think you get lost if this show tanks right away.
Okay. Okay. Oh, but also, did you a little trivia, because you chimed in with a bunch of trivia about Alias, and
Yep.
I just remembered this off the top of my head. In 2001, when Alias premiered, there also, and just hang with me for a second because this is going to sound a little bit beaten off the path, but I'm going to bring it back to you in a second here.
I trust you.
Yeah, I just want to warn you because I'm going to just go a little bit off track here. In 2001, on ABC, a small little assistant had recently started working there around the time that that Alias aired, by the name of Damon Lindelof, and he was working on a show called Crossing Jordan. And he would eventually, sorry, this is going to all come around. He would eventually talk to his boss, Eric Kripke, because he got called in by the president of ABC at that time to take a meeting with JJ about this other show. So I find it so interesting that some of my favorite writers have worked in the same ecosystem and have been a part of the same company. For lack of a better word. I mean, just one more thing, and then I swear to God, I'm going to get off this track. Like all my favorite writers right now, they work for the same organization. They all work for Warner Media, which is the funniest thing ever. Because JJ has an overall deal at Warner. Damon is there, and Joss is there right now. Right? The only guy that I really love that doesn't work for Warner Media is Alex. He's at Viacom CBS right now.
Yeah, Paramount.
But I Paramount, thank you. I find it so interesting the connections between writers and how certain people end up working together in the career paths that they take. You know. Also, I did find it very interesting that two of the writers on this series of Alias would eventually become my favorite writers of all time once I saw a little movie called Transformers. I find that also very interesting that it all comes back to, all roads lead to JJ when it comes to my love of fandom for a lot of stuff.
Yeah, the guy's a force of nature, man.
I just find it very, very interesting. So before we wrap up here, just to surmise, I love this pilot. I really thought that it was such an interesting way to start a series. And to go off one of your points, Matt, in 2000, we really didn't have a lot of these mystery spy shows on TV. At least not like Alias. And I do think that going through the series, as we progress here, as we go through, the episodes, is going to be a lot of fun, and it's going to bring back a lot of memories for us. With that being said, my grade for this pilot on a scale of 1 to 10, that would be an 8. I really, really enjoyed this. With that being said, what would you give this pilot episode of Alias, Matt, if you had to grade it?
I give this pilot a 9. It sets up so much stuff and is so fun and really nails the tone of what this show is going to be. And there was 2 things I wanted to mention real quick. One was, you mentioned how, this has some nods to Mission Impossible in it. Because JJ loved Mission Impossible before he did Mission Impossible. And one of my favorite moments, and I'm pretty sure it's in this, but I watched 4 episodes the night I watched this, so hopefully it was in this episode, is when Jack Bristow comes to get Sydney, and he's like, you got to get out of here.
Car?
Yep. And she touches his face to make sure it's not a Mission Impossible style mask. So there's a moment where he's like, get in the car. And as he's leaving, after he's told her everything, she feels his face to make sure it's not someone else, that there's no seam. So that was a shout out to Mission Impossible, that it was very subtle, but was awesome. Because in the spy world, you never can tell what you're looking at. And she literally touches his face to make sure it's him and it's not a mask that he's wearing. So I thought that was awesome. And like I said, when I watched this pilot, I ended up watching 4 episodes that night because I was just like, man, like this show is so good. But the DVDs that I have, I bought the day they came out, September 2003, 17 years old. The pilot played fine. The rest of the disc would not work. It was blocking, and like sometimes DVDs can break down, like they can get DVD rot. So I was devastated. I was like, oh my gosh. And so I checked a couple other discs and they're also like rotted out. But Alias is available on, Apple TV and some other stuff to buy in actual high definition rather than the DVDs. There was never any Blu-rays. So I've had to go through other means to watch my episodes because I literally, the second it wouldn't play, I was like, how dare you? I was devastated. And I was like, I got to rebuy this right away. And then I was like, oh, but if they put out like eventually a Blu-ray set or like something, like I don't want to buy the DVDs again for no reason. So the digital is tying me over for now. But, it was the one time physical media really failed me. And I was like, no, because this show, like I said, once you start watching, you just want to binge. And even, with Felicity, like I watched, 6 or 7 episodes per season, but I've plowed through, 6 episodes of Alias so far. And I'm like, I might watch the whole season as we go because it is just awesome.
Yeah, no, you mentioned, I'm so happy that you mentioned the mission thing because I knew that Tom came to JJ. Sorry, people, on the other side. I knew that Tom came to JJ because he saw Alias and he was like, "Ooh, this guy does spy stuff really well, so I want to come to him. I really want to offer him the job." Mm-hmm. But I didn't know that JJ was a fan of the 60s shows. So you're dropping all sorts of knowledge today, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, so awesome introduction to the series. Nice change of pace from Felicity, but still some of that wholesome Felicityness baked into the DNA of Alias as well.
With all that being said, Matt, where can the good people find you if they want to talk to you about anything?
Yeah, hit me up on Twitter at Matt Crandall. And if you got any questions for us, hashtag Radio815, we'll answer them.
If you want to talk to me about anything about Alias or whatever, you can reach me also on Twitter, except I'm at CreekFanatic88. Thank you so much for listening. And as I often say, we'll talk back soon.